Martin's Market was a success. Sometime in the depths of the Great Depression, Steve Martin, who lived with his wife Margaret on State Road just south of town, took a terrible fall at his job at the steel mill in Lorraine. Although he recovered from his injuries, he never returned to the mill. Because it was his nature to be industrious as well as innovative, he managed to overcome those economic hard times and to prosper. Then, as the Great War in Europe and the Pacific loomed on the horizon, Steve did something foolish. He bought a little grocery store on one of the most difficult and confusing traffic corners in the then village of Vermilion, Ohio. The store was situated on the south side of South Street with State Street to the west and Exchange Street to the east. It almost faced Division Street to the north, the street we now know as Main. This was not a thriving enterprise, and Martin was well aware of it when he purchased the place. Yet, as previously mentioned, he was both an innovative and industrious individual. What he didn't know about the business he learned. And there was one more thing about Steve: he was a very gregarious person. He liked people, and people liked him. Though at first Martin had a partner in the business, it wasn't long before that fellow became discouraged and left. Then, on his own, he made the business flourish. One friend named Steve Ola, who for a time, lived in the apartment above the market. He was a butcher and taught Martin, as well as his friend, a shirt-tail relative and employee, Louis McKay, that fine art. In the meantime, Steve and his wife had 2 girls, Jerry and Marlene. They were beyond the shadow of any doubt very bright spots in his life. Former Vermilionite Mary Ellen Martinek, who was living in Atlanta, Georgia, wrote to tell me about the days she used to play with the Martin girls behind the store. There were lots of beer cases in the back, and Steve would let us move them around to make dollhouses or whatever suited our fancy. I also remember that every single day Steve had something cooking on his stove in the back and always fed me. My mother's constant requests that Steve not feed me because it would ruin my dinner fell on deaf ears. Steve told her he was not about to feed his kids and not me, and that was that. The interior of the market was clean, modest, and practical. Markets of that time had both a very distinctive and pleasant odor. The aroma of fresh-made sausage and fresh bread were wonderful. The congenial smiles and friendly banter of both Martin and Louis McKay were exceptionally welcoming. And here, among tall boxes of Rinso detergent, cornflakes, loaves of Wonder Bread, displays of suds without soap, Kraft cheese, shelves of Campbell's soup, Aunt Jemima pancake mix, and sundry other grocery items, Martin's business thrived. One of the peculiarities of the times, now almost forgotten, was the fact that nearly all businesses in town closed at noon on Wednesdays. Those old enough to recall the old blue laws may also remember that nearly all businesses were closed on Sundays. This meant that most shopping had to be done Monday through Saturday. Thus, it became the custom for businesses to close at noon on Wednesday and to stay open until noon on Saturday. This way the workers only worked a 5-day workweek. In any case, Martin's store followed suit. And it is upon this thought that I turn to one of the most unique gatherings of Vermilionites to ever sit before a camera, the Sauerkraut Gang of 49.
Steve Martin's Sauerkraut Banquet. The Second War had been over for 4 years. Our nation was headed into a building and manufacturing boom like no other experienced in the history of the world. And on a Wednesday afternoon, on a balmy summer day, a group of perhaps the most unlikely gentlemen to gather were nonetheless gathered in the back room of Steve Martin's store on South Street for a grandiose banquet of sauerkraut, sausage, bread, and beer. Life was good. Seated at the table, from left to right, were Dr. John Dickinson, Joe Villa, his brother George, unknown, a man only known by me as Joe, unknown, Elmer Trinder, Steve Martin, unknown, Don Trinder, and Clarence Feldkamp. Standing, from left to right, were Harold Needing, Curly, holding Marlene Martin Young, Elmer Brush Haber, unknown, Barney Zinitz, Russ Vassbinder, unknown, another Trinder brother, and Steve Ola. I apologize for the unidentified men in the photograph. If there are folks who might identify them, I would appreciate such information. The story surrounding the way in which I first discovered and eventually acquired a copy of this photo is nearly as interesting as the picture itself. But I'll leave that to another time. As is obvious, Vermilion's professional photographer, Rudy Mock, took the photograph. Whether or not he was a member of this illustrious gathering is unknown. And why these particular people attended this gathering is also unclear. But as was mentioned in an issue of the Vermilion photojournal, Steve Martin was apparently an extremely gregarious personality. So it is safe to assume that he is the thread that tied these fellows together. Each man in this picture is worthy of a story by himself. Doc Dickason was one of the last of a certain breed of doctors to serve our little town. He was a family doctor, a family man, well known and respected. His family ties went back to the pioneer beginnings of Vermilion, i.e. the Trinter and Sherrod families. Then came the young Villa brothers, George and Joe, fresh from the Big War. They had migrated from Pennsylvania and were on their way to becoming very friendly and familiar figures in our town. There is Harold Needing, who did, I believe, a bit of fishing and eventually owned and operated the Lake Erie Drive-In just east of the bowling alley. He was a pleasant person, and very active in the community. Elmer Brush Haber was the town plumber. The business he started still bore his name. Russ Vassbinder was co-owner of the Okagi restaurant. Russ was a good fella, not to mention a real character all his life. Clarence Feldkamp lived along State Road just south of town. If I am correct, this place was very near the farm where Steve Martin once lived. Elmer Trinter and his two sons were handsome, strong men from the farm. Steve Ola, as I have previously mentioned, was a meat cutter who lived over the store, and the person who had helped Steve Martin and Lou McKay learn that trade. And then at the head of the table there was Steve Martin, hardworking and amiable. When this photo was taken, Steve was in his latter 40s. One evening near Christmas, a year or so after this great banquet, he suffered a heart attack in his home on Main Street. He passed into the hands of God several hours later. Not only was this a great loss to his family, but as one can see, it was truly a great loss to our community as well. All those in attendance of the great sauerkraut banquet of '49 went their own way, but all must have had wonderful memories of that particular day, and that particular place in time, for the remainder of their lives.